Well, our scripture readings this summer have been taking us through the Hebrew Bible, some of the wonderful stories in Genesis, and we've been pairing them with these picture books as a way to reflect differently perhaps on these stories, but also make a connection with our kids. Well, today's scripture reading requires just a little bit of background. It, in and of itself, is sort of a long reading, but in order to understand it, you have to know a little bit about what's come before. If you have been here this summer, you might remember a few weeks ago, we heard the story of how Abraham and Sarah were promised a son, even though they were thought to be too old. Soon, Isaac was born. But God also promised that they would be grandparents of a great nation. When Isaac grew up, Abraham became anxious to see Isaac get married so he could see the beginning of this great nation. So Abraham asked his most trusted servant to find a wife for Isaac, not in Canaan where they had settled, but back in Abraham's homeland. The servant goes and eventually runs into Rebekah as she comes to the village well for water. In today's reading, the servant has gone with Rebekah to visit her family and tells Rebekah's brother Laban the whole story. The servant said, "I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he's become wealthy. He's given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, male and female servants, camels and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son when she was old, and he has given him all that he has. My master made me swear, saying, 'You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I live, but you shall go to my father's house, to my kindred, to find a wife.' I said to my master, 'Perhaps the woman will not follow me.' But Abraham said to me, 'The Lord before whom I walk will send an angel with you and make your way successful. You shall find a wife for my son from my kindred, from my father's house. Then you will be free from my oath when you come to my kindred, even if they will not give her to you. You will be free from my oath.' So I came today to the spring and said, 'O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now you will only make successful the way I am going. I am standing here by the spring of water. Let the young woman who comes to draw, to whom I shall say, "Please give me a little water from your jar to drink," and who will say to me, "Drink, and I will draw for your camels also. Let her be the one whom the Lord has appointed." Before I had finished speaking in my heart, there was Rebekah coming out with her water jar on her shoulder, and she went down to the spring and drew. I said to her, "Please let me drink." She quickly let down her jar from her shoulder and said, "Drink, and I will also water your camels." So I drank, and she also watered the camels. Then I asked her, "Whose daughter are you?" And she said, "The daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him." So I put the ring on her nose and bracelets on her arms. Then I bowed my head and worshipped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me by the right way to obtain the daughter of my master's kinsman. Now then, if you will deal loyally and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, tell me, so that I may turn either to the right hand or to the left." And they called Rebekah and said to her, "Will you go with this man?" She said, "I will." So they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse, along with Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "May you, our sister, become thousands of myriads. May your offspring gain possession of the gates of their foes." Then Rebekah and her maids rose up, mounted the camels, and followed. And thus the servant and Rebekah went on their way. May these words be to us our light and our life. Thanks be to God. There once was a big, tough soldier wrestling with all he had seen and done in war. And so he went to see a local monk. "Monk," he barked in a voice accustomed to instant obedience, "teach me about heaven and hell." The monk looked up at the mighty warrior and replied with utter disdain, "Teach you about heaven and hell? I couldn't teach you about anything. You're dumb. You're dirty. You're a disgrace, an embarrassment to the army. Get out of my sight. I can't stand you." The soldier got furious. He shook, red in the face, speechless with rage. He pulled out his bayonet and prepared to slay the monk. Looking straight into the soldier's eyes, the monk said, That's hell." The soldier froze. Slowly he realized the courage and compassion of the monk who had risked his life to show him hell. He put down his bayonet. He fell to his knees, filled with gratitude. To which the monk said softly, "And that's heaven." Well, this sermon is not about heaven and hell, but it is about how we practice gratitude. Like the soldier, some gratitude comes naturally, perhaps, when things work out well. If the tests come back negative, if an unexpected gift arrives, if someone solves a problem for you, if someone does something nice, we say, "Thank you." It's almost a reflex to say thank you when things go well. Now, my family had a gratitude jar for a while, and each night at dinner we'd write on small pieces of paper things that we were grateful for, thankful for, wanted to thank God for. Thank you, God, for friends, for someone to play with at recess, for teachers who care, for books, for peanut butter and jelly, that was mine, for flowers, for walking to work, for unicorns, and for our dog. Day after day, the jar filled with the good things in life, the things that went well, the things that satisfied us. We know people who practice gratitude are said to be healthier and happier. But what happens to our gratitude practice when things don't turn out well? And thanks to the prompting of today's scripture, what might happen if we gave thanks before we knew how things were going to turn out? Now, on the surface, things seem to turn out pretty well in today's scripture story. Through this chance meeting at the village well, the servant found Rebekah, who was willing to accept his invitation and return with him. All's well that ends well. The main point of this story seems to be the surprising and wonderful ways God delivers on God's promises. But what struck me as I sat with this story was this moment in the middle. Just after the servant met Rebekah, when he stopped to praise and thank God, even though it was still very unclear if Rebekah would choose to return with him. Now, at the risk of making too much of a passing moment in the story, it struck me how rarely I practice gratitude in the middle of things, when I still do not know how it's all going to turn out. In the middle, my prayer is usually help, not thanks. The more I looked at this story through this lens, the more I saw the uncertainty in this matchmaking errand. We didn't read or hear all of this. Well, actually, it was referred to. But this uncertainty is first reflected in the panic question the servant asked Abraham before leaving. What if this woman won't return to this land with me? Though he wanted to do what was asked, he worried that it was a fool's errand, a long shot at best. His fear was significant enough for Abraham to calm him down, saying, "Don't worry, if she refuses to come, you'll still have fulfilled your oath to me." The servant was also given no instructions on how to pick someone. No description, no checklist of qualities. Waiting for someone to offer him a drink at the well seems less than direct. And even after meeting Rebekah, there is no guarantee she would return with him. And yet, there at the well, before he knows how everything will turn out, it says he bowed his head and worshiped the Lord, saying, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness towards my master." It was this moment that grabbed my attention. If it wasn't for church some weeks, I'm not sure I would stop in the middle of things to thank God, especially in the face of uncertainty. It wouldn't come naturally to bow my head in praise after running out of gas on a remote road. I wouldn't think to stop and thank God when the doctor tells me the results of a test won't be in for another week. Gratitude wouldn't be the first words out of my mouth after discovering that my credit card balance was bigger than my checking account balance. But even when we're surrounded by uncertainty, perhaps there is still a reason to be grateful. One day while walking through the wilderness, a man stumbled upon a vicious tiger. He ran and soon came to the edge of a high cliff. Desperate to save himself, he climbed down a vine and dangled over the fatal precipice. As he hung there, 2 mice appeared from a hole in the cliff and began gnawing on the vine. But suddenly he noticed on the vine a plump, ripe strawberry. He picked it and he popped it in his mouth. And it was so incredibly delicious. What is the strawberry sitting right in front of you right now? The strawberry for the servant perhaps was the fact that Rebekah did come from the same tribe as Abraham. He had indeed met a woman from Abraham's father's house, his kindred. He saw this as a sign of God's faithfulness and presence in the midst of it all, even though the outcome was still uncertain. Not only does Abraham's servant stop for this somewhat, to me at least, surprising moment of gratitude and praise, but it turns out that his moment of gratitude is part of what ultimately convinces Rebekah and her family that this marriage invitation, as crazy as it sounds to us, is of God. After the encounter, Rebekah runs to tell her family, and because of what she saw and what she tells them, her family greets the servant, calling him blessed by the Lord. And after explaining his mission, Rebekah's brother Laban says definitively, "This thing comes from the Lord." So what would it be like to practice gratitude, not just when things turn out okay in our lives, or when they don't, but in the middle, in the face of uncertainty, when we do not know what is next. Dear God, thank you for the long lists of unfinished business, the loose ends I left dangling, the big unanswered questions, the problems that remain unsolved. Can we really find something to be grateful for then? Open your eyes, says Tommy DiPaola. Be grateful. Be grateful for everything you see. Indeed, perhaps we are surrounded also by strawberries. Awaken all your senses. Listen, smell, taste, and touch the goodness that is around you. Give thanks for today, right now, right here, in the middle of everything. Even if all you do is give thanks for being alive, for listening, for breathing. And could we even give thanks for uncertainty itself and all that it has to teach us about faith and letting go? Benedictine brother David Steiner-Rast has a video, believe it or not, on YouTube called A Good Day, which I suggest you find. With over 1 million views, it's a 5-minute invitation to explore gratitude for today. Like Tommy DiPaola, Steiner-Rast reminds us that today is a gift, and the only appropriate response to it is gratefulness. He says, quote, "If you do nothing else but to cultivate that response, the response of gratefulness, as if this were the first day of your life and the very last day, then you would have spent this day very well." Well, I may have stretched the servant's actions a bit to make my point. But I do think it's tempting to read stories like this and think God is only about promises fulfilled, perfect matches, happy endings, and salvation won. But I think we know that God also accompanies people on difficult and uncertain journeys, like the one now Rebecca begins as she goes to meet Isaac. Faithfulness is not just turning to God when things are good or bad, but remembering God is always present and returning to God over and over and over to say thank you for what is. Amen.